would you stay till the morning light, or would you follow me?
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kayla, and if you're not new, thanks for coming back. Always happy to have you. If you are new, I like to do a lot of book and lifestyle content here on this channel, so if any of those things interest you, make sure you subscribe and stick around. And today we are back with another book review. This year, I've set myself the challenge of reviewing every book that I've read in 2022, and I think I'm on like 8 or 9, and I know I filmed a couple more reviews, but I haven't edited them yet. But I am very excited to share today's review. This is actually a reread review for me, so by the title of this video, we already know that we're talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses. Before we get into it, I just want to apologize if you can see like the glare of the lamp behind the camera in my glasses. They are blue light glasses, but if I want to see if I'm in focus, I have to be wearing them. So we are talking about this lovely book. This is the old cover. This is the OG cover, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This book, I'm sure you've heard of it, has kind of taken over the internet and book talk and like a bunch of book groups, Bookstagram. The whole book world, I feel like, is reading and talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses, or at least the new adult, young adult scene. I feel like older people aren't really talking about it, but I read this series. I was a senior in high school when I read A Court of Thorns and Roses for the first time. So that was like 2017, and I probably finished the series by 2018. So it's been like it's been 5 years since I've read this book. And this was my favorite book for a very long time, and is still up there on my list of favorite books. Side note, I have been kind of wanting to do a video that my sister suggested, which is like my top 10 favorite books of all time. So let me know if I should do that. This book I was super excited to reread. That was a goal I set for myself at the beginning of 2022, was that I wanted to reread and relive these books. Mostly because I've seen them on TikTok so often, and like fan edits and merch. I bought some merch from this book series because it's becoming so popular, and it just made me want to like, I felt like I was missing out. It made me want to like relive the story. So yeah, I was a teenager when I read this. This was the very beginning of my BookTube, Bookstagram, book blog journey. This was one of the first books that I read, and as you can see, I got onto the sticky flag this time for my reread. I hadn't even started annotating and sticky flagging books at that point. It was so early in my like book media journey. I do plan to reread the whole series. However, we all know Miss A Court of Mist and Fury is large and in charge, and she's a thick book, and I can't tell you the last time I read a book this long and made it through to the end. So it will take me some time, but I do want to do it. I also fully thought that I had sticky flagged and annotated this one, but they're not here. So I'm going to assume I didn't, but this is over 600 pages long. I do just want to say that in these reviews, I cover a couple of main things. I tell you about the book, a little bit of background information. I give you a summary of the book. I give you the pros. I give you the cons, any other thoughts that I have, a 5-star rating, and then I tell you, to sum up, do I think you should read it or not? So Sarah J. Maas also wrote the Throne of Glass series, which I never actually finished. I made it 4 books in. So basically, A Court of Thorns and Roses is how it was pitched to me. A fantasy YA new adult retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It is a high fantasy, high court series. So it follows the main character, Feyre, who is a human whose family had fallen from wealth to kind of this squalor, poverty situation, and she was hunting to save her family and help feed her family in the winter because they're all very, very hungry, don't have money. While she's in the woods, she comes across a wolf, and she actually shoots and kills the wolf, but the wolf was not a wolf. It was a high noble fae from the land of Prithian, which is right across the woods, right across the wall from the human lands, the mortal lands. In exchange for taking this wolf's life, Feyre must be taken away to Prithian to live for the rest of her life, or she can be killed, a life for a life. She is taken by this fae named Tamlin, who is she comes to learn, the High Lord of the Spring Court. There are, I think, 7 courts of Prythian. There is Spring, Summer, Autumn, and Winter, and then there's also Day, Dawn, and Night Court. Feyre is taken to Tamlin's estate in Spring Court, and he is wearing this really ornate mask, and he can shapeshift into different creatures as well. When she gets there, she learns that everybody in Spring Court has been cursed. Everybody at his estate has been cursed, and they all have like masquerade masks that they can't like remove. So while Feyre is dealing with being separated from her family, knowing she'll never be able to go back and see them, and now that she is not kind of bound to keep them alive, she has a lot of free time. She explores painting, she learns more about the Fae world, and she comes to fall in love with Tamlin, who is cursed by an evil High Queen Fae named Amarantha. And it turns out that in order to save Spring Court, Feyre must undergo 3 challenges in Amarantha's court to overall succeed and be able to continue to live with Tamlin. That's a very brief summary. I try not to spoil it as much as possible, but I feel like anything that I spoiled is minor. I want to start with the cons before I get into the pros, and it's also very interesting for me doing this as a reread, because I feel like the last time I read this, if you'd asked me, I would have been like, no cons, all pros, best book ever written. Well, we'll talk about my rating later. One of the cons I found, and this is totally my fault from being a reread, like, I know what comes next, so I hated the way a lot of the characters were right now. Like, I actually really liked Tamlin. There are a lot of reasons to not like Tamlin that are revealed later in the series that I know about, but in this book I was like, is he really that bad? Like, he doesn't seem that bad. But there were definitely parts where I thought that Feyre was a little bit annoying, and she was a little bit short, and I was like, why are you being annoying? Stop it. I really did not like Rhysand. Really thought he was annoying and kind of an asshole, and there are things that he does to Feyre that I just think are not kind, and the way that he interacts with her is just not nice. And I know that there are such things as character development and dynamic characters, but characters that I'm rooting for throughout the series, that I know I end up rooting for, were a little bit evil, and I was just like, what are you doing? I love you too much for you to be evil right now. There were parts that I thought were pretty slow in this one that I didn't necessarily think were slow the first time I read it. I also will say I read this book fully in the course of 2 days, like 70 pages one day, like the other 400 a second day. I was a fast read, but there were parts that I was like, oh, this is kind of boring. Like, I just kind of want to skip through. Like, there were a lot of parts of talking about Tamlin going out in the woods and Feyre's just kind of stuck at home. I felt like I was reading to get to the good parts that I knew were coming, but if I had been reading it for the first time, I don't think it would have felt slow at all. This is something I always struggle with in books like this. Like, and I get that it's a trope, but I truly cannot stand when characters are just assholes. Like when the guy is just a jerk and they end up still like falling in love. Again, I understand that characters can be dynamic and characters can change and character development is a thing, but there were points where Tamlin was literally just a douche and Feyre was like, I love him so much. There were just parts where he was literally just like being mean, and I was like, I'm over you. There were a lot of parts in this book that gave me secondhand embarrassment, and fun fact, secondhand embarrassment is my least favorite feeling. There's some things that Feyre says and like some reactions that she has, I was like, ooh, that's embarrassing. My biggest pet peeve is, and this part is spoilery to the end, that like, it's still like, I knew it from the first one and it still bugged the heck out of me this time. If you haven't read it yet, I'll put a little timestamp of where you should go to, but this is going to be a spoiler. Under the mountain, Tamlin does not try and help Feyre. He really does not do anything to help her while she is literally risking her life, and she is stuck in prison, like rotting away, trying to save him and his blessed court, and he is doing nothing, zero things, nothing to help her. Not only that, the one time that they are alone together, all he does is make out with her and try and jump her bones. That's it. That is nothing. He's not like, here's food, here's like a little weapon to get out, here's what you should do, go out this way, let's run away together. He does none of that. He just proceeds to make out with her. What the heck? When she's facing Amarantha, Tamlin does nothing. Nothing. At the very end, it is Rhys that goes to defend Feyre, and we know why later in the book, but Tamlin, it still bugged me because Feyre loved him so much and she did so much for him, and he did the bare minimum to help her at her moment of greatest need, and it kills me. The pros. There are a lot for this book. I still really enjoyed this story, even having reread it. The world is so beautifully built that I was so happy to go back to Prythian. I love the lore and the history of this world and the landscape, the concept of the different courts and the different like settings, especially relating to the seasons. I would love to be in Autumn Court, even though he sounds like a jerk. I would still love to go see what Autumn Court looks like, or Summer Court, or Dawn Court. So it's a very like beautiful, lovely setting in the courts of Prythian. The writing in this novel is so gorgeous. The way that she describes things and the certain phrases that like could be your favorite quote, the way she writes in her language is so lyrical and beautiful. It was just like, it felt like I was reading art. That sounds really cheesy, I know, but like it just was such a pleasure to read. Such like lovely writing, and it just made me really happy. I feel like I say this a lot, it's one of those books that makes you believe in magic. There is a point where Tamlin takes Feyre to a like lake made of starlight, and that was just like such a lovely mental image for me to like read about it and visualize it, being in these like glades in the springtime in the warm air, to see a like lake of starlight was just such a like a boost of serotonin, if that makes sense, that I was so happy to reread this book. This is not a pro or not a con, but this is just a remembering for me, or just a thought. This is way spicier than I remembered. Maybe I was just like an innocent high schooler, but I was reading things and I was like, there is a lot more sexy time and spicy time than I ever remembered in this book. So that's just a thought, not a good or a bad thing, but I was just like, I definitely missed that the first time that I read it. I love a high court fantasy. I love an involved story with, like I said, lore and hierarchy and a political system and political intrigue. I loved that aspect of this book. It's so well thought out and planned, and especially knowing what comes in the next couple of books, I can definitely say that Sarah J. Maas like knocked it out of the park with this one. Got some secondhand embarrassment, and while I was frustrated with the fact that Tamlin started out as a jerk, I did really like the romance aspect of this book. It's a little bit more slow burn, I think, than I remembered. I thought it was a lot more instantaneous when the first time I read it, or I remembered it being a bit more instantaneous, but it is pretty much a slow burn. It takes a lot of time for Feyre to trust Tamlin, which I definitely appreciate given the circumstances, and so watching them like slowly become friends and fall in love was actually really lovely, and I think I definitely preferred it to the instant love that I remembered it being. This book, like I mentioned, I read over the course of literally 2 days. It does suck you in. I feel like their first like 75 pages were, like I said, a little bit slow, like getting accustomed to the world, and actually getting her to Prythian takes a little bit longer and is not maybe the most interesting part of the book. But once I hit like page maybe 100, I was flying through this book. So much was happening. It's so fast-paced, and I feel like we did cover like 3 or 4 months in the span of a couple of 100 pages, and it went so quickly. So much was happening. We were learning so much and kind of uncovering secrets of the Fae world as we were reading, that it moved really fast, that you didn't even know that that much time was passing while it was. I think this is definitely a loose interpretation of Beauty and the Beast, but I loved like the subtle hints and nuances, the small homages to Beauty and the Beast. There's a scene where Feyre realizes and sees the library for the first time, and I completely forgot about that whole aspect of this book. So to like see that, and also like my brain was doing a parallel, the book scene and Beauty and the Beast, and it was just like such a happy moment, because Beauty and the Beast is my favorite Disney movie and fairy tale, and like to see it in a book and like those key moments, like the library, was just super happy. And lastly, my favorite pro, or my last pro about this book, is Feyre herself. I remember Feyre being a very like strong, perseverant character that like truly goes through a lot and could have given up at any point in time, but this reread really showed me how selfless she is, that she is truly trying to help everyone else around her even more than she helps herself. She spends the first half of the book really trying to help her family, who has never really done anything to help her, who don't really go after her or try and stop Tamlin from taking her, who've never really appreciated all that she's done for them. She did not have to help Tamlin in his spring court. They kind of took her hostage a little bit, and she could have like left them there, and that curse had nothing to do with her. But she still felt for them and grew to connect with them and wanted to help. Even if it meant giving more of herself than she had. She's a very selfless and giving character, and I think that's really admirable. I also think Sarah J. Maas made her very, very real. As much as you can in a fantasy novel, but she had insecurities and she wasn't a perfect, innocent character. Like, she talks about having like hanging out with this boy in town. They're not a real thing. They're not a couple, right? He's just like a casual thing. She can't read. She can't write. She's illiterate, and she has a little bit of a temper, or she's very distrusting, or she makes mistakes because she thinks quickly, but she also works to overcome all of those things. But she's not like this picture perfect character. She's like a real person, and I think that makes this story really, really compelling, when you can relate to a character, or you can connect, or you can recognize somebody who would be a real person. You want to root for them and you want them to do well. So I think I appreciated Feyre a little bit more than I did in past books, even though there were some times that she was being a little bit annoying. Overall, even as a reread, I gave this book 5 stars. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it, and I still think that this is a 5-star read. It is such a good book. It is great writing, a great storyline, an interesting concept. It's well thought out, it's well planned. I know that fantasy and high fantasy and court fantasy and fae fantasy is not for everyone, but I truly think that a lot of people could read this book and really enjoy it. Like, I feel like if you don't like fantasy, that's fine. I still think you should give A Court of Thorns and Roses a shot, because it's more than just fantasy, right? Like, it's fantasy, it's romance, it's like a little bit of a thriller, like it's a little intense. I think if you don't like even if you don't like fantasy, give it a shot. And if you do like fantasy, I think you'll really love this book. I think Sarah J. Maas has really mastered high fantasy, in my opinion. So I would definitely recommend this book. 5-star read. It will suck you in. It has great characters, it's a cool concept, and it has such a beautiful world to explore that develops throughout this series. And the 3 books are a whirlwind, and they're really, really enticing. But I would highly recommend reading A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. If you have read Court of Thorns and Roses, what were your thoughts? Did you love it? Did you think it was worth the hype? I personally do. If you did not think it was worth the hype, why not? Let us know. Or is there another fantasy that you think is more worth the hype? You know what I mean? And if you haven't read it yet, do you want to? Or like, what questions do you have? We are happy to help. But that is all I have for you guys today for this review of A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I'm hoping to read the next ones and to read a little bit more YA fantasy this year, or high fantasy. So if you have any recs, leave them in the comments. But if you like this video or found it helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you can stick around and see more reviews, especially when I read and review A Court of Mist and Fury. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and happy reading. Bye guys!
Would you stay till the morning light, or would you follow me?